To call the meeting of the Planning Commission for September 19th to order. We start out with a roll call.
Duval.
Present.
Gorham.
Here.
Grunenwald.
Here.
Marone.
Here.
Norwood.
Here.
Stangline.
Here.
Yeager.
Perfect. All right, let's do a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We're at number 4, looking for an approval of our agenda tonight.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I
Mr. Wall.
would like to have an amendment to new business, adding an item number C. If we could have a brief discussion on the content of staff reports to council, and we can expand on that.
Discuss staff reports, basically, is what we're looking at, or how they're done? You're looking at, okay, perfect. All right,
With that, I would make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
all right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none. We're moving on to we're up to item 5, looking for approval of the minutes from the August 16th meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
All right, second.
Second?
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Hearing
Abstain. One abstention.
And one abstention. Please
Sorry.
Please note the abstention. All right, very good. And then we're going to move on to, we're up to new business, and we're looking at item A. We're going to consider a conditional use permit for an animal clinic at 1605 Mill Avenue. James, you got this one?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Northern Lakes Rescue has submitted a request for a conditional use permit to operate an animal clinic at 1606 Mill Avenue. Their primary operations include microchipping dogs, vaccinations, and adoption. Dogs are immediately fostered on the intake days, so they're typically not overnight at the facility. There's also a retail aspect that is permitted in the district. So the property is zoned TN2 district, and zoning ordinance section 515-3 appendix A, table of uses allows animal clinics as a conditional use. Animal clinic shall be allowed as a principal use provided that the clinic meets the applicable provisions of the section. So I'm going to highlight some of those required sections to operate as an animal clinic. All areas in which animals are confined are located indoors and are properly soundproof from adjacent properties. So staff was able to view the facility. We included some indoor pictures as well. Upon review of the inspection as well as submitted applications, all animals are proposed to be kept indoors on the 3rd level where there are no windows. Sound should not be an issue to neighboring properties. A ventilation system shall be designed so that no odors or organisms spread between wards or the outside air, and will be capable of completely exchanging internal air at a rate of at least twice per hour. Air temperatures must be maintained between 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. We did also take a look at this with the facility and confirm that it does have a heating and ventilation system that will maintain a constant air temperature in the building. Staff also did extensively research other local vets, kennels, as well as surrounding ordinances. No facilities or ordinance require an advanced ventilation system other than common HVAC systems. Another condition, a room separate from the kennel area shall provide or sufficient size to adequately separate animals that are sick or injured from healthy animals. The proposed room that the animals are going to be kept in is quite large, so they could certainly be kept away from each other if there was one that was sick. The applicant is not proposing to kennel animals other than the occasional one-night stay for late intakes. And again, part of the city code section that was put in the findings of fact is that the keeping of 4 or more dogs overnight would constitute a commercial kennel, which is prohibited by city code. So there's not a whole number of dogs that they could keep overnight. Also, indoor kennel floors and walls shall be made of non-porous materials or sealed concrete to make it non-porous. The applicant removed carpeting and exposed the concrete floor in the area that's proposed to house the dogs. Staff did make the applicant aware of the condition, and staff did put this as a recommended condition before the facility can operate as an animal clinic that they would have to be sealed. They seem like that wouldn't be a problem. Animal waste shall be flushed down an existing sanitary sewer system enclosed in a container of sufficient construction to eliminate odors and organisms and shall be properly disposed of at least once a day. The applicant, as part of their operational plan, did detail the immediate disposal of all animal waste in closed waste bags. Also, an indoor or outdoor exercise area shall be provided to accommodate the periodic exercise of animals boarded at the kennel. They did talk about volunteers walking the dogs around the neighborhood, as well as creating kind of an indoor walking area as well because of the large space that they have and the large building they have. So with that, the Community Development Department recommends to hold a public hearing and recommend approval of the conditional use permit for an animal clinic at 1606 Mill Avenue with the following conditions. Dogs cannot be kept or left unattended outside of the building. No more than 20 dogs can be at the premise at any one time. This number excludes puppies under the age of 4 months. That language is kind of taken from the city code section regarding kennels. No more than 4 dogs can be kept overnight at the premise. That the building is properly soundproofed to negate noise pollution created by the proposed use. The property is free of animal feces at all times and is properly disposed of to mitigate any noxious smells to the neighboring properties. All state health department and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency requirements for the facility are met. And the Community Development Department, and that is everything. So I can certainly answer any other questions that Planning Commission may have. Did include some of the conditions that are kind of rules within our ordinances of the city code. This would give the commission and city council the ability to revoke a license rather than just fining. So that's why some of those were included as conditions, you know, even though they are ordinances within our city. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Duvall?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I want to thank Dylan and James for following up on some questions that I had regarding finding a fact. I'm going to have it, I swear. The finding of fact regarding the ventilation system. I'm thinking that's whatever. It is relates to ventilation system shall be designed so that no odors or organisms will spread between wards or to the outside air. And in my reading of that, kind of make me think that this is a different kind of an HVAC system than your standard one like we have in City Hall here or elsewhere. Their research, I think, has been very helpful to say that, you know, first of all, the regulated community has not been held to this particular standard, but also that this has been migrated into our new ordinance, but there, in a survey of our peer municipalities, we don't seem to have similar language there. So I just wanted to point that out, that it seems to have an intent there of maybe containing potential pathogens from circulating into the building, like say kennel cough or something. And so maybe we'll have some questions about that to the applicant if they're present. And these, I don't know, but these may already be kinds of things that are addressed in the State Health Department and pollution control requirements. So animal health or something like that may already have that stuff, so we may be covered on 6. But I just want to acknowledge the work that they did to follow up on the questions. So thank you for doing that, and I might want to have a question or two regarding just that. How do you manage pathogens through just best behaviors or best practices? So thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Last chance for other questions?
Just for staff, right?
Yeah, for staff at this point, yes.
Not at this point.
All right, very good. All right, hearing that, I will open the public hearing at 6:09. Would the applicant like to speak if the applicant is present? And your name and address, please. Thank you.
My name is Stephanie Tangen. I am the board treasurer of Northern Lakes Rescue at 1606 Mill Avenue. I live just south of town. Do you need my home address?
Well, just approximate. Just say which road you live on. How's that?
I'm off 110th Street.
Okay, that'll suffice. Thank you.
Excuse me. I don't know if you guys have any questions directly for me. To answer your question regarding kennel cough, the rescue, I would just like to point out we're not a clinic. We're not a boarding facility. We are a rescue and house animals for a period of typically no more than 8 hours at a time. When the dogs do come in on a transport, They are immediately taken off the transport vehicle. They are walked around to relieve themselves. They're brought inside. They're fed. They're kenneled while we get the rest of them going. They are each seen individually by our volunteers to be looked at, given their vaccines if they're needed, a microchip, any grooming that needs to be done. If, we have a litter of puppies and they come in all poopy, of course they need a bath. And then they're sent off to their foster homes with their supplies. The majority of the building is supplies that are donated to us, and we then give to our fosters to be able to take care of the dogs while they're in their homes. All of the dogs that come in are seen by vets prior to their arrival to us. The dogs that we do receive from Texas do come with a health certificate as required by state law because they are crossing state lines. Any of the dogs that we get from any of the shelters down in the cities also are seen by a vet before they come to us. If we are aware of any illnesses, they don't come until they're better. As far as the ventilation system goes, the space in which they're in is one room, but they are not kept close together. There's at least 15 to 20 feet between each kennel while they are in that room. So.
Thank you.
Thank
I'd like
you.
to remain here. I think we may have some questions for the applicant. Mr. Maroon, do you have a question?
Why would you think I would have a question? Sure. As a city, we deal with land use issues only. I did read the newspaper yesterday, and I saw the article and about the founders of the organization, one of whose name is on the letter you submitted. And I think the only question that I would have on behalf of the city, because the only thing we really regulate is the land use, is there anything that you would have concerns about today about your ability to meet the conditions that the city is asking you to meet as part of this long term? Are there any doubts or questions or concerns that you would have about the capacity of the organization to meet those conditions
No.
long term? And then I think related to that is if something were to happen where the organization was unable to operate for whatever reason, what types of things would need to be done to, in a sense, vacate that place and make it work? Would that be a simple operation, or would that be a complex operation?
As of today, I currently have absolutely no concerns. All of our volunteers are completely dedicated to the rescue and the dogs, getting them adopted, taking care of them while they're in our care. As far as should the rescue go under for any reason, we would need to hold some sort of a sale to liquidate what we have. As no dogs are kept in the facility, we don't have to try and place them anywhere. All the dogs are already somewhere, living in someone's home. So it's just a matter of equipment at that point.
Are you leasing this building
We
from
are
someone?
leasing the building.
Okay, so if there had to be a cleanup or other things, if you vacated the building, someone owns it and they would essentially
Take back over
still
the
have.
building.
Okay,
Yep.
all right,
Yeah, we are currently on a 2-year lease.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so thank you for addressing the questions I had in the introductory comments. So you've described, you've got a set of practices that you do. First of all, animals don't come in unless they've been checked by a vet first, and then if they're flagged at some sort of an illness, they're going to be rerouted someplace to clear, and then they're back to your
Correct.
facility. Are these sort of just like written procedures that you have so that every staff person or another volunteer is able to kind of know, yep, this is the routine, or?
They are written, but they are also verbally expressed upon the time that we are tagging a dog. So a lot of rescues, a lot of shelters know that transporting a sick dog isn't okay. It's not acceptable. But we always check in before it's time for that dog to leave wherever they're going to come to us what their condition is. We were notified this morning that we have a transport coming up that we are holding in our other building up in Pequot Lakes because we don't have the approval yet for this one. And that'll be this weekend. But we were informed this morning that 2 of them woke up and they were kind of lethargic and vomiting. Turns out they ate one of their bowls. So once we got that clearance, I mean, we were told by the people who have them, we're not sending them. But once we got clearance of, okay, they just ate one of their bowls, they're feeling fine now. Now they're okay to come. So it's a known practice in the rescue community, but it's also one of our written policies.
Great, thank you. No further
welcome.
questions, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from the group? I have one question. I'm sort of infamous in this group for asking questions that really don't have much to do with the matter, but I'm interested. Where do the dogs come from? What's the typical story that a dog ends up in a rescue like this? Is it abandonment or?
Many of the dogs that we get come from Texas. Texas and in the South is notorious for treating their animals like property. They come from the streets. People abandon them. People don't take care of them. People surrender them. They're strays. It's all sorts. Periodically, like once a year, once every other year, we go down on a mission down to Texas to feed the street dogs. There are towns in Texas. The 5th Ward is one of them. There's a group of ladies down there who feed street dogs. That's what they do when they get off work. There are thousands of dogs on the streets in Texas. Spaying and neutering is not done. And it happens not just in Texas, but all over in the South. It happens up here too, but it's more common in the South because it's warmer. But we'll take a dog who needs a home. It doesn't matter what its circumstances are. We take dogs with cancer and try and rehabilitate them, take care of them while they're here and until they're not here, so.
Very good. Thank you for your service. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It means a lot to me. I think that'll be all for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak on the matter? Name and address and
Mike Higgins, 1801 Mill Avenue, own Paper Mill Cross Road. We totally support the rescue. Just wanted to give them my support.
thanks, Mike. Anybody else? All right, I'm gonna, if no other questions, I will close the public hearing at 6:17, and we'll open it up to discussion on the commission.
Ms. Chair, I would have just one clarifying question for staff then.
Sure,
if
go
I
ahead.
could. So essentially the same question I asked the applicant. Do you have any concerns from where you're sitting that if for some reason the operation went insolvent, went away, that there would be any like long-term issues that we would have to deal with as a city? I'm specifically saying something that we would want to bond for or secure for before giving approval.
Staff does not believe there'd be an issue. The site doesn't really have a lot of outdoor area or anything like that to store things. Those would probably be the biggest issues in my mind. I don't think that's going to be a problem because of the size of the building. So, if something did happen, there'd be some, stuff inside that would have to be liquidated or removed. But again, the building's leased, so that'd be something that the owner of the building would have to work on.
I don't have any other questions or comments.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, not hearing anybody, would anybody like to start working on a motion?
I'll move to approve the conditional use permit with the recommended conditions.
Very good.
Second.
And we have a second from Mr. Duvall. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Very good. Would you like to do a roll call on this, James?
Probably just a standard.
Just a standard vote? All right. We have a motion and a second to go ahead and approve this conditional use permit with the conditions that have been stated. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Next steps, James?
So next steps for the applicant. So this is an advisory body to the city council. So this will be heard at the next city council for final approval or denial of the conditional use permit. And that will be held on, let's see, October 2nd at 7:30 p.m. in the council chambers here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, folks. All right, we are moving on to 6B. We're going to consider an interim use permit for a short-term rental at 502 Juniper Street. James, Dylan, who has this one? Dylan?
All right,
Excellent.
I've got this one for you this evening. So we have an interim use permit application here applied for by Michael Fish on behalf of the property owner Brian Knoll for a short-term rental at 502 Juniper Street. In our findings of fact, you can see an aerial map to denote basically where this property is. Now, in our traditional neighborhood 1 district where this property lies, short-term rentals are an interim use, and they must comply with the following minimum standards as required by Section 515-3-34 of the zoning code. Maximum rental period shall not be more than 28 consecutive nights. The applicant's proposal does not exceed that 28-day limit. They must receive an interim use permit. This application process is how we get there. Application for an interim use permit shall include the number of bedrooms and the dimensions of the rooms. Those are listed. The proposed short-term rental has 4 bedrooms. Number of off-street parking spaces available to guests. There are 4 off-street spaces allocated to guests in the driveway, and the applicant, in their rules, does not permit short-term renters to utilize street parking spaces. All accessory structures are outdoor recreational features available for guest use. The yard is available for guest use along with the fire pit. Guests are responsible for making sure fires are completely extinguished. If property managers were to receive a call from a neighbor concerned about a fire that is unattended or too large, that would be dealt with immediately per their policy. They have a pet, garbage, and noise policy. No pets are allowed on the property as submitted in the house rules. They have 2 garbage bins that are located at the property with a capacity of 6 bags, and there are quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m., 1 hour stricter than is noted in city code. The permit holder shall post emergency contact information, police, fire, hospital, and show renter's location of fire extinguishers in the short-term rental. The housing inspector confirmed this during their inspection of the property. The contact managing agent needs to be within 50 miles of the property and available 24/7, during which time that property is being rented. Mr. Fish is a resident within the 50-mile radius of the premises. The occupancy maximum number of guests allowed at the property is stated at 8, which matches up with the number of people allowed in the bedrooms based on dimensions. While the total occupancy for the short-term rental would be 9 guests based on square footage, the applicant still notes that it is 8. All of the rooms used for sleeping have egress windows that comply with Minnesota State Building Code. The property is connected to city sewer and water and building plans clearly show full bathroom, toilet, shower, tub. Additional occupancy by use of recreational vehicles, tent, accessory structures, or fish houses is not permitted. Our applicant is not proposing this use, and recreational vehicles, tents, accessory structures, or fish houses are expressly prohibited in their list of rules. The premises has been inspected by the housing inspector as well as the fire marshal. And as of this writing, we have had 1 party contact the Community Development Department regarding the interim use permit, and no concerns were brought forward in that contact. As staff, we recommend approval of this interim use permit for 1 short-term rental at 502 Juniper Street. with the following conditions. First, that the short-term rental cannot operate until there is an approved inspection by the fire marshal, which we believe is the case based on our findings of fact. Submittal of the local option for sales tax form to the finance department, and we recommend that the interim use permit for short-term rental at 502 Juniper Street terminates on 12/31/24, as is precedent with this commission.
Thank you. Questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, I have two clarifying questions. We say in the report that the owner or the agent will live within 50 miles. Are we just noting that, or is that I couldn't find that requirement anywhere.
It's a requirement, I don't know if it's in the findings of fact, but it's a requirement of our rental license.
Yes.
Oh, it's a requirement of the rental license.
Yep.
It's not in the code. It's part of the rental license.
It's part of the rental license.
Gotcha, okay. I was confused on where that was coming from.
Yep.
And
The second question, and I apologize if everybody else knows this, but I don't. The interim use permit terminates at the end of next year. Are they required to then apply for a new permit, or is there an extension? Like, what's the process for?
It would require reapplication for that.
So they would go through the entire application process again, including coming here and being reissued and all that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And now, it could be something similar to what Ironton does. We just kind of set that precedent at the last planning commission. City council approved it, so because of some of the concern for short-term
Yeah.
rentals. But what Ironton does, and we've done that in some of our research, they grant it for 1 year, and then you come back after the 1 year to see how it operated. And then they grant it, I believe, for 2 after that, so it could be potentially longer after that. But that was kind of set at the last meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I see that we're discussing some of this later tonight, so I just was wondering where that sat. Thank you for that clarification.
Precedent in motion.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Chair. Question to staff, for the local sales tax option, or local option sales tax form, is it your intent that that's submitted prior to them starting operation, that has to be recorded or handed in and received before they start their?
That's correct, and I believe this applicant's already worked with the finance department on that, and then there's, I believe, monthly submittals that they have to do as well. In the past, and some other instances, I don't know about short-term rentals, but it's been difficult in a few properties to get this, to make sure that it was completed, so that's why staff has included this as a requirement.
Thank you.
Other questions to staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing at 6:28. Would the applicant like to speak?
My name is Mike Fish. I'm the owner-broker of Minnesota Real Estate and Management. So I live off of 139, down off of 23 there. So this is the first rental I've had in Brainerd, but I've been doing this for several years. I've developed and managed about 50 properties in the area, and most of them are lake homes. I've got 10 in Mille Lacs, I've got them in Aiken, I've got them in Cass, and of course in Crow Wing, and done quite a bit of advocacy up at Cross Lake and Breezy, and done my best over the years to make sure that things are fair and balanced. And I always say it's not short-term rental that it's a problem, it's bad management of short-term rental. Case in point, I managed around 800 to 900 bookings and never had a complaint to a city or a county. So I've got very, very specific ways we find our guests, very specific ways that, from the rental agreements, et cetera. And 100% of all neighbors have a letter in my personal cell phone. 100% of my guests have my personal cell phone. And, we make sure that, as I've said, because I have to get conditional use permits in Aiken too, as I've always said, if it doesn't work for the neighbors, it doesn't work for us. But we work very, very hard to build that relationship. If you notice, the first part of my rental agreement says have the utmost respect for our neighbors. They didn't choose to live next to a rental. They've all got my cell phone, and to me, neighbors are better than cameras. We run as tight a ship as we possibly can. If you guys are familiar with what we're dealing with up in Cross Lake and areas like that, or what happened in Ironton, and I've certainly got my opinions about that, but there's just too many people running Renegade and running these VRBOs and causing problems, which forces everybody's hand to try and deal with those problems, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Questions for the applicant?
I do.
Go ahead.
Mr. Fish, did you apply or process an application for licensing with the county for this property?
I did not.
Okay.
So there's some confusion. I certainly apologize for the confusion about this. So I've got my things that basically paperwork that I hand all potential clients saying, hey, this is the processes you want to go through. Brian thought that he was completely good because he had a long-term license, and so there's some miscommunication and misunderstanding about that. And I have a question too, because I noticed in your paperwork it mentions it doesn't directly say it, but it says it's up to you to contact the Department of Health, Minnesota Department of Health. And that's an ongoing conversation I've had with the county over the last few years as far as do you need should you get a lodging permit with the state to have a short-term rental in Crow Wing? Well, you should, right? In Mille Lacs, all of mine do. Aiken, all of mine do, because they won't give them the county license until they have the state license, but that's not necessarily the case in Crow Wing. So there's some confusion there. So I did just want clarification from you guys. Are you saying that we've got to go to the state and get that lodging permit? Or are you saying we can operate, because although I highly recommend it, with all my clients, because if something ever comes up and it's brought to the state, then they're like, do you have the permit? Probably less than 25% of the people doing short-term rental in Crow Wing have that.
So we
state
have put the onus on the applicant to do that.
Okay. I've always strongly recommended, I've never had an issue brought to the state, but it's a numbers game. So I'll definitely recommend that he goes ahead and gets a lodging permit. It would be a breeze on this one. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fish.
Thank you.
Another question?
I'm sorry, one more question for Mr. Fish.
Yep. Thank you. Can you tell me, is this property owner occupied, or is it specifically a rental property?
Yeah, I can tell you that it was, I don't think you'd mind me saying, or I'd never say it. It was purchased to be an owner occupied, and his work took him to another state. So basically the idea is he's trying to cover costs, and short-term rental at some point would probably move back. Again, it's a unique property for me. I've done off-water properties, but usually they're not worth it. This is a unique one because it's right by the hospital, and I've got a relationship with one of the bigger organizations down in Florida that staff doctors and nurses. So I regularly fill my places up on the off season with traveling doctors and nurses, and I expect this to be 90% traveling doctors and nurses, to be honest with you. So it's one of the great things about it is it's right by the hospital, so that's a great plus. So I think his intentions are for us to do this for the next few years, and I don't know if he intends to move back or sell it. Most of what I do is lake homes, and people use those lake homes, and I fill it up when they're not there to cover their costs.
Thank you, Mr. Fish. No further questions.
I'll ask one quick question here. How do you advertise for renters? What's the means?
Well, this property is a little bit different. I've got a software platform. I advertise on about 25 different websites, Airbnb and VRBO being the biggest. This particular one I have on Avail. Avail is on websites like Realtor.com and Zillow. So to be honest, I've got this advertised on short-term rentals as potential longer stays, and on long-term rental platforms as shorter stays, if that makes sense. So it's really what I'd call a mid-term rental. We're going for month to month, ideally. I suspect 90% of this is going to be medical personnel.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that. Would anybody else like to speak on the matter? One more time. All right, I will close the public hearing at 6:34, and we'll open the floor up to discussion.
Mr. Chair, I think the only point that I would add here is maybe just amending the condition 2 to capture the staff intent here that the optional sales tax form shall be submitted to the Finance Department prior to operation.
Yep, thank you. Other discussion or questions? Then do we have somebody ready to put together a motion?
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
would make the motion to approve the interim use permit for one short-term rental unit at 502 Juniper Street, Brainerd, with the following conditions. Short-term rental cannot operate until there is an approved inspection by the fire marshal. Number 2, a local option sales tax form shall be submitted to the Finance Department prior to operation. Number 3, the interim use permit for a short-term rental at 502 Juniper Street, Brainerd, terminates on December 31st, 2024.
That's a heck of a motion. I like it. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'm going to give that one to Jeff. I'm giving that one to Jeff. All right. Any questions about the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Next steps, Dylan?
Yes, so the next steps, this interim use permit having been approved by the Planning Commission, which is an advisory body to City Council, will be brought before the City Council at its next meeting on October 2nd. That meeting starts at 7:30, and at that point it will be voted on by the full council, and if approved, upon completion of the conditions, operation will be able to begin.
All right. Thank you. All right, we are moving on to 6C. Help me if I get this wrong here. We're going to discuss staff reports. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think just at our last meeting, at our August meeting, I believe, we had a tie vote, a 3-3 split on an agenda topic on a variance, and the issues pertaining to that were whether it met the criteria outlined in the ordinance for approving a variance, or also that's state statute as well. So at that point, that decision gets rolled forward to City Council to make that decision. Staff do a good job of verbally describing to council sort of the nature of that decision, and it's my thought that it would be helpful to the council in their preparations to be able to have sort of the basis of what that vote got hung up on in the packet, so that they can ask some questions or be thinking about it prior to the meeting. In that case, there may have been appropriate questions you might want to ask the city attorney, for example. And so it feels to me like when we get some of those really knotty kinds of decisions that we don't have clarity on, that we might try and package in the staff reports sort of what the basis of the issue was that the commission hung up on, so that information can be part of the packet for the council members to be able to then review and have prior to the meeting. So that would be my thoughts on that, and I don't know if there are other shared feelings or counter perspectives that say that's not a good idea. I'd just like to hear sort of what those thoughts are. Maybe Ms. Stengliner, you might be able to offer some perspective as a council member as to how you'd like to see information like that packaged as well.
I mean, I try to share that in the meeting a little bit, and I take notes, and but it would have to come out in the like I can't tell them I can't talk to all of them at once. It's a big no-no when it's not a meeting. So I think we get the breakdown, like the votes for and against. I don't know how you would better.
I'd have to look back at how I, did it in the last packet. I know I verbalized it. I'm not sure if I put it in the staff report or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could certainly make sure that, probably just an overlook, that maybe it didn't get in the staff report, but I know we kind of discussed what the hang up on the vote was. I put that part of it. But yeah, I can certainly make sure that it gets into the staff report.
It might be useful too if we verbalize what we want them to,
Right.
to share. in the packet.
My question is, would that happen before a vote or after vote? Because like, once we've taken a vote, then that's kind of it for us. So I think what Mr. Duvall is saying, and I appreciate it, is we want to communicate the subtle, the different sides of the argument. So it's not just like, oh, it was a tied vote. It was a tied vote because of this, because of that. Am I sort of capturing what you're
Correct.
looking for? Okay.
Yeah, correct. You know, and I think that, if I understand Ms. Engline's point, that could be packaged up, that we could help craft what is the nugget issue that you put down in a couple of sentences so that city council goes, I understand where they got hung up. If you can render it down to a couple of sentences, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you can have a one-pager.
Right, right.
But what are those key fundamental issues that created a broad spread like that in the vote of the council? It's not a one or two dissent, it's split, and that seems important to say what is the issue that divided the board like that, or the commission like that.
It was split, and I can say, I think even amongst the people voting, we were a little split in our feelings too. I think it was like, how do we get to what we want to say, and how do we do it? James, is this helping you a little bit?
Yep. We can certainly do that the next time there's a split vote. Maybe kind of do something that it's concise down to 2 or 3 sentences or something like that to make sure the planning commission fully kind of supports what's going to be included in that staff report.
You know, and I think, you know, our liaison's role there is to help support, the perspectives of the commission, and you do that job, and you do it as staff does in a verbal report. So it's trying to get the information before the meeting, and then your comments can be important context to clarifying how this decision came here, and may provide guidance for council as well as they try and render the issue. So that's all I want. I want to spend a lot of time on it, but thank you for that. And I think, I think staff can do that short paragraph and run that by, but maybe it's a quick request to the chair and maybe the commission as a whole saying, okay, here we are. What do we think the issue is? And Tiffany's perspective say, here's the issue we think you need to highlight so that the council can do it. Thank you.
All right. Excellent, thanks. We are on to item number 7, unfinished business. A, we're going to consider the off-street parking ordinance and, what am I looking at? Hold a public hearing. But let's start with James. What do we have?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Planning Commission's been working on this for the past couple of months here, as well as the Parking Commission has reviewed this as well. So Community Development Department presents a final draft of the amended off-street parking ordinance for the Brainerd zoning code. So I'll just kind of touch base on some of the kind of the main objectives or items of the proposed ordinance. So one of them is removing parking minimums for all non-residential uses, I guess with the exception of Main Street and the TC District. When you go back to the ordinance, within this district, this is kind of maybe more of a recommendation from the Parking Commission, was to require some parking in our downtown district to just alleviate, maybe some of the on-street parking concerns, taking parking spaces away from the shops. So it's really kind of one space per dwelling unit downtown, so that would include apartments, and this would just be for new uses. One space per boarding room, one space per rental room and a bed and breakfast, and then one space per commercial unit. This doesn't have to be an owned space by the property. It could also just be certainly a proof of a lease in another parking lot. So those would really be the only parking minimums in non-residential uses. Create parking maximums in all non-residential zoning districts. So this was discussed previously using the calculation of essentially the kind of the base floor plan of the first level of the building, and then we work through that calculation of allowing one space for 200 square feet, or in the auto-orientated districts, one space per 150 square feet. Really mainly affecting, we looked at some of the properties, the CVS Pharmacy, Hardee's, kind of some of the ones that had small buildings but large parking lots that kind of went unused there. So that went into the calculation for that part. Determine a new standard for minimum parking, residential parking required that prioritize a more compact and less burdensome parking footprint by creating a tiered approach for multifamily buildings. So before it was for all multifamily buildings, no matter if it was a studio or if it was a 1-bedroom, it was 2 1/4 spaces. So this takes a tiered approach where if it's just a studio bedroom, it would require 1 space going, kind of up as you increase the bedrooms and the units. Also including the accessory dwelling unit that was added to the zoning code and the parking minimum formula, incentivizing bicycle spaces for multifamily buildings, requiring fully enclosed unattended trailers to be closed and secured at all times, and regulate parking on unimproved surfaces in the rear yard. Certainly I can answer any questions of the Planning Commission, but staff's recommendation would be to hold a public hearing and recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending section 515-4-12 off-street parking and 515-3-28 outdoor storage.
Very good. Questions for staff?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Duvall?
James, I got questions on table 515-412.3, parking space minimum. The column on the right says maximum parking space count. We would intend that to be the minimum, is that correct? Or is it the maximum?
Yep, that would intended to be, let's see. Yep, that should be minimum.
You have to provide at least that amount, is that
Yep, that's correct.
correct? Okay. And then if I follow down to the attached single-family dwellings and so forth, you have the asterisk item there, when you have more than 3 bedrooms, the calculations are that if I'm appropriately saying this, we're going to add a half a space for each bedroom above 3 in that dwelling unit.
That's correct.
Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay, so the way it's reading here, it almost says it's like you just add a half space for the dwelling unit. So I'm thinking we're missing some language, or is the intent correct that we're adding a half space for each additional bedroom in that unit?
We do have the plus symbol there, but we could say, we could reword it a little bit different. We could say add rather than having the plus symbol there.
But after the 0.5 in parentheses, you're adding that space per dwelling unit. So it's almost as if you're adding a half for the dwelling unit. The intent is to add a half for each additional bedroom over 3.
That's correct.
Okay. So that might need some clarification. The way it reads right now, to me, as I look at it, if you've got more than that, you're adding a half a bedroom per dwelling unit, and so.
That reads clear to me.
How's that?
I don't know, it's clear to me, but, because you've got studios, 1 space per dwelling unit, bedroom, 1.5 per dwelling unit, 2 rooms, 3 bedrooms. And then it's got the asterisk, which says each additional bedroom in a dwelling unit over 3 is 1/2 space per dwelling unit. You're saying it should say per additional dwelling unit over 3?
No, I think for each bedroom in a dwelling unit.
Oh.
So the bedroom, it's
Okay.
It's
Then I
almost
got it.
saying you just,
Oh, you now.
yeah, you with me on that? Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Crap.
but it's the intent, James.
Yeah, so what are you thinking, maybe some better verbiage for it?
I think after the 0.5, you're simply saying that much space per bedroom in a dwelling unit.
Okay, yep, I follow.
Is that consistent with the intent?
Yep.
Excellent. Other questions?
Does there need to be within that same situation, does that need to be clarified that we round up or round down when we end up at a half?
That's already included in another section of the code.
Okay, sounds good.
Is it round up?
It is round up.
All right. I was curious. Any other questions? I'd like to talk a little bit about section 6. it's a little, boy, I had to read A about 4 different times before I really understood what it meant. I finally got to the point where I understood what it meant, but it takes a little while to kind of work your way through it. I don't know if there's a little better way to kind of to say what we're trying to say, a graphic, something to kind of explain a little bit about it. I generally think, and I may be alone on this, and if that's the case, we'll let it go, but I still would like to see a cap on total vehicles and maybe a little better definitions of just what you can store in your yard and how close to property lines and things like this. I could be alone on it, and if that's the case, well, we'll just move along. But I just think, is there any way we can kind of clean up that language at all?
I know adding a graphic certainly could help afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that could be a good idea,
Like
showing
the
that.
zoning law will just.
Yep, so you got your 30 feet in the rear yard that's kind of next to that alley area that you can park on an unimproved surface. Anything beyond that to the house has to be screened with a 6-foot fence.
Yeah, just something just to make it a little more clear in terms of what we're saying there.
Yep, we could certainly add a graphic to that. I think
Okay.
that would probably be the most helpful.
Good, because I think we want to
Love
make it so a person can just look it up if they have a question and go, bingo, there it is. That's where my neighbor can park. That's where they can't park, et cetera. Good. And I guess I am alone on thinking that 12 or 13 vehicles is too much in one yard. But I guess that's people have more stuff now. That's something I'm coming to the conclusion of, is people have so much more stuff than they had 30 years ago. And we have the same size houses. And maybe that's just why we're ending up with these situations with boats all over the place and cars all over the place. And that is our modern life, I guess. I don't think it's always the most aesthetically pleasing, but I guess that's where we're at. All right, other discussions or questions? If not, let's open a public hearing on the change at 6:51. Anybody who would like to speak on the matter, please come on up. Last chance. All right, I'm going to close our public hearing at 6:51. And with that, any discussion where we're at or preparation for a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
I have a sympathetic ear on the number of vehicles that, or stuff, boats,
Snowmobiles,
box trailers, camper vehicles and
fish
stuff,
houses.
et cetera. Would you be comfortable with that being inside of or added to the 6-foot privacy fence scope that you're saying? There's the threshold beyond which you're gonna have to put a privacy fence up just to kind of contain the look.
Right, I would.
So that may be something that we could amend that language, because what we're saying is if you can't keep it 30 feet back, or within the lot lines, or the setbacks, I think you got to put a privacy fence up.
I would be comfortable with that person.
High opacity.
Yep.
And I would be as well. I have the similar concern that if I'm off of the setbacks and I'm, within, or I'm up to 30 feet away, I'm pretty good, but otherwise, I got to put a privacy fence up. If we were to say that some threshold number of stuff, then you got to put the privacy fence up, might get us there.
I guess, other thoughts on this? Anybody else like to weigh in on it?
I love it. I think it's great. I think
Okay.
everybody here, me excluded, has done a great job putting this together, so I'm ready to vote for it.
Okay. Going back to what we were discussing there, Mike, are you willing to put a number? Are we talking 3 to 5, 4 to 6? And in terms of if we want to go ahead and do amended language.
I think that's a great discussion question for everyone on the commission, to just kind of say, what does that threshold look like? Because I don't know.
Right. I mean, we don't want to make it, it's about, we don't want to make it onerous on people to live in Brainerd. That's not the goal. But also the goal is to have a sense of aesthetics and a sense of, responsibility for the stuff you have and on things. Because sometimes perhaps people need to consider other ways of storage, because there are other ways you can store vehicle, boats, and things like this, and services that are operated, so. I would be happy with a number of somewhere between 3 and 5 outside the fence myself. But maybe that's too arbitrary, and I don't know.
fence. I'd say-
Outside the better?
I'd say 3.
3, there we go, okay. And maybe that would get people to prioritize putting the fish houses and the snowmobiles on one side and the vehicles on the other. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? And we're talking just this is just the rear section of the yard. If you have a driveway coming up from the street, you can still, the ordinance permits you to put as many vehicles as you want. Yes.
Mr. Chair, question for staff.
Please.
Do we have is there any parcels or lot sizes that are above 5 acres inside city limits?
There would probably be, within city limits there would be, but most likely not in like our traditional neighborhood districts.
And so, okay.
So, yeah, I could see,
And this applies more towards traditional. This doesn't apply to agricultural or anything else that is going to be in those larger lot size areas.
This is TN 1, 2, and 3, is that what we're looking at here?
so we'd be looking pretty much, kind of throughout Brainerd on this one. Now, the chance of getting a complaint on an agricultural property, probably is not going to be an issue, but, would theoretically probably apply based on the way the wording is.
And so then the next part of that, this is complaint driven as for the action of it.
Yep, so it would be complaint driven.
Okay.
All right.
So there could be a subsection that excludes rural living districts towards it. That'd probably be, that may be a good exception to the rule.
I would be comfortable with that concept myself. I like that. I think we're getting closer here. I like one other quick, kind of going back real quick, talking about doing graphics. It might be good at the graphics too to include where setbacks are, and just how far can I go to my neighbor's fence. In anything just to make.
And we already do have rules for that. So
Okay.
it's essentially your accessory structure setbacks or how close you can put it
I'm saying if you
record.
include it in a graphic, again, it would help, because I think it's so good, again, what we did in the zoning code by showing sample blocks and how they would look like. So that would be my thought there. Is anybody feeling courageous to start crafting a motion, if we're done discussing? Unless we have more discussion points.
Additional discussion, back to the table 12.3, we have these thresholds, the tiered structure or the tiered approach for attached single-family dwellings, but single-family dwellings we don't. Can you help me think about why we didn't go that route on essentially detached single-family?
It does seem that 2 spaces per unit, whenever we've been reviewing properties, is something that in staff's opinion works. Kind of in some of our smaller lots in traditional neighborhoods. So it has been working to, with our new zoning code, where we maybe allow a duplex and a TN1 now. You're still looking at then. I guess this one would be for a duplex. You'd go by the tiered approach. But from staff's perspective, the 2 spaces per unit has been working. And then, in these neighborhoods, you do have the off-street parking capabilities, which I think, City Council and Planning Commission has been fully supportive of parking on street as well. So that was kind of staff's reasoning behind keeping it at 2.
We have a number of single-family homes that had 5 to 7 bedrooms and adult drivers occupying those bedrooms that are in single-family homes, and so you're almost looking at the same scenarios why you would be thinking about maximum or minimum, parking off-street parking spaces in the joined single-family homes, and I'm wondering whether we would want to. We don't have to necessarily adopt all of those when we might think about maybe the 4 or more kind of a thing that you need to start thinking about a half a vehicle's capacity in there to as a,
Yeah, staff would certainly be open. It would probably be easiest just to add it to the, add single family and just remove the 2 spaces per unit there and just make it part of the calculation if that makes sense to Planning Commission.
does anyone have a reaction to that, whether the single family should be pulled out from the tier approach, whereas the duplexes in multifamily get put into that tier structure?
That's a good question.
I-
Other thoughts? There definitely will be single families that will have multiple cars, of course.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have capacity, as staff reports, you've got on-street parking capacity in most neighborhoods, but not all.
And you can't count on that when you move into multifamily housing situations.
Right.
Got it. I think I would be comfortable with the change that you're proposing. Other thoughts?
Does this mean we have to hold a new public hearing?
Is that a significant change?
James,
I mean,
what you think?
We could reopen the public hearing if we're making significant changes.
You don't think we're making significant? We're just working around the margin?
I think, to me, these are fairly, similar to what we've had.
Okay. Very good. Thoughts on that? Are we comfortable with that? That we're okay acting upon the public hearing we've held? That seems to be a consensus. Anybody ready for the thorny task of putting together a motion?
Chair,
Yes.
game, but I'm going to need some help if I don't nail it, so.
All right. We're here for you.
So recommending approval of the proposed ordinance amending sections 515-412 off-street parking and 515-328 off-street storage with the following amendments. Amendment 1 is clarification of language in table 12.3 that under attached single-family dwellings, et cetera, that each additional bedroom in a dwelling unit over 3 bedrooms equals plus 1/2 space per bedroom in a dwelling unit. And then same table for single-family, 2 spaces per unit, and then each additional over 4 equals plus 1/2 space per bedroom in a dwelling unit. Are you with me so far?
So far, so good.
And then we were to add a graphic. I don't know if we need to do that as part of this motion. I want to kind of set it aside if we can, and we can come back to the pictures later. If we get intent, is that?
Yep, so we're not changing the wording on that, so the graphic would just reflect the wording.
So the graphic is a task. And we're going to, for section 6, we're going to exclude the rural living districts. And we're going to put a limit on the number of off-street,
Backyard.
rear yard vehicles to what I think I heard was
3?
was it 3? To 3
Outside the fence.
outside the fenced area, and this is outside a 6-foot privacy fence.
Yep.
So there is my attempt to package.
Mike, you are a warrior. Excellent. Do we have a second for that?
Second.
Thank you.
Excellent. Terrific. Any questions? Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. All right, we just did something about parking. Excellent. Great. We've been working on that a little bit for a long time. All right, we are moving on to 7B, the review, the draft ordinance for the short-term rentals. James or Dylan? Excellent.
Yes. All right, so the topic of short-term rentals has been one we have delved into recently. However, basically upon the discovery of several short-term rental properties in the city of Brainerd operating without valid interim use permits, staff was tasked with working with existing operators to bring properties into compliance with the zoning code, and additionally work with those, work with Planning Commission to create a stricter and clearer regulation on short-term rentals, including caps on said number of rentals, as there are housing shortages within the community that these short-term rentals may or may not affect. Ultimately, the attached draft targets 3 particular areas, and summarizing much of what this commission asked for on the August 16th regular meeting. Most of that language has made it into this proposed ordinance. So, upon combining ordinance language from multiple other Minnesota cities, staff recommends that we define short-term rentals into 3 categories: accessory home share, accessory vacation dwelling units, and vacation dwelling units, all which really differ upon the owner occupying the dwelling or not, and or the owner being on the premises or not. By defining short-term rentals into these 3 categories, it makes it much easier to determine clear regulation that is going to balance property owners' privilege to use their home as a short-term rental while also balancing housing stock concerns off of that. So the second part of what the proposed ordinance does is it allows for property owner-occupied residences to be used as an accessory home share or a accessory vacation dwelling unit limited upon receipt of a rental certification and an interim use permit for their personal residence, and these would not be factored into any caps. Basically, if someone is owning their home and staying in it and letting others stay in it for a fee, yes, they would need an interim use permit and a rental license, but that's not directly taking away from our housing stock. The third part really of this proposed ordinances is a limit on the total number of vacation dwelling units or non-owner occupied short-term rentals. These limits restrict it to the ownership of 1 vacation dwelling unit in the city of Brainerd at any time. It caps the number of VDUs allowed in the traditional neighborhood zoning districts to 10, caps it in the contemporary neighborhood zoning districts to 10, and caps the number of vacation dwelling units in any multifamily dwelling building to 1 of those units. Our recommendation as staff would be to recommend changes for this draft to bring a final draft ordinance to our October meeting.
And I'll just kind of add to that. So what staff did here, we brought at the last planning commission meeting a whole bunch of different options for the commission to review based on other ordinances. And what we included seemed like it was items or wording that the planning commission liked. So we included all of the verbiage in there. Certainly some of the stuff could be removed if planning commission thinks there's too much verbiage in here. But what we did was include everything that it seemed like the planning commission was interested in. I'd say the primary ordinance verbiage came from Duluth and St. Paul. Those are probably the primary ones that the verbiage came from. So with that, we'll open up the Planning Commission to answer any questions and certainly take a look at this and see what Planning Commission would like to see with the final draft.
All right, questions for staff? Looking. Mike?
Yeah, so James, on the Part D ownership limitations, you know, you're doing the 20 limited units, correct?
Yep, so it'd be limited to...
Use, right?
Yep, and that's for the VDUs that's, you know, strictly owned by
Strictly
maybe a rental
rentals.
company or an individual that's not living there.
So, so those are gonna be granted on a first-come, first-served basis. And I'm trying to imagine how you do that, or what the options you would do that doesn't cause staff to have to invent a new process or dedicate a lot of time to kind of doing that. Is it simply putting a date stamp on an application, say, sorry, we're not accepting now, I'll put you on file, and, have you had some thought?
Staff did consider it. That would probably be the best way to do it. You know, as of right now, we don't have a ton of them, but that, you know, certainly could be change in the future. But that's if we did max our 20 out. Obviously, renewals would be allowed to be renewed. They wouldn't have to go back into the pool. And then any new ones would just be put on essentially on a waiting list.
Oh, so they would have, if you had a license, back to Mr. Marone's question earlier this evening, and you've got a 1-year interim use and that date comes up and you reapply, so you actually have, you have a priority place in line. Is that stated in here? I don't know. if
It's
I-
not stated in there. We
didn't know that
certainly
it
could
caught
state
that.
it in here. I think that may be a good idea to do. That's something that staff did think about
I like
as
the
we looked at the
idea
first
that,
come,
you
first
know,
serve.
Not getting too specific details in there, because I like the idea of saying, well, maybe we can graduate the term of the interim use permit each iteration based on performance of some sorts, whatever those standards are gonna be, that the police aren't called all the time, or this or that. The other question I would have for you is, do you have there's a lot of numbers in here, number of days, number of people, number of this and that. Do you have the ability to easily track that information as staff, to be able to identify noncompliance, or does that again mean there's?
I believe we do, but between our administrative support staff as well as our housing inspector that works on the rentals, we certainly would have staff time to do that. We may have to reconsider that, I guess, if all of a sudden we had 100 of them, but with the number that we have, and even right now, we don't have any of them that are homeowner occupied that have proposed it.
So you've got D4, the one that made me think about this is multifamily dwelling unit may contain only one short-term rental of any type, do you have the capacity to be able to track that? And, number one, if someone comes in and applies, I suppose you could do a quick check of that address or whatever to see what you already got on staff. So that's probably a computer exercise. Right?
Yeah, that's something to be computer exercise, and obviously to make Planning Commission aware, right now we do have a triplex that has 2 units in them. So this would affect that, so certainly something to consider. And that'd be for Rick Badeau's rental on South 6th Street.
If I recall, that one could only rent one at a time, though. Is that correct?
They came back he came back for an interim use amendment to add a second unit to the triplex.
But my thinking on that, I have to go back and look at it. I thought only one of them would be in play at a time. But,
And that was the original interim use permit.
okay. No further questions of staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions for staff? I've got a couple, at least one here. How many permits are in play now? How many of the 20 are used up? Let's put it that way.
So I believe we'd have probably 6 to 7.
So we'd be looking at a situation where we'd be opening up another 13, 14, something to this effect.
Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. And my other point was, and then we're prepared for a situation. Oh, I know what I was going to get at. Was I think Mike? I had left the meeting early, but Mike had brought up the idea of capping at 4% or something. There was a capping at a certain percent.
I think that was one of the examples in the table of other ordinances that staff prepared.
4% like that. What's roughly, what percentage of our housing stock are we putting in play here for the short terms, approximately? Just
Boy,
guess.
at 20, you'd be at way less than 1%.
Way less than 1%?
Yeah.
That's helpful, thank you. Good. Other questions? Tiffany?
I like what you're trying to do by splitting them between traditional and contemporary neighborhoods, but I think we're not getting. I think that the concern that was expressed at the city council meeting, and maybe not here, was them clumping together. I don't know if there is a way that we can, because, the traditional neighborhoods, if they're all in North Brainerd, we're gonna hear about it. As opposed to if they're kind of spread out between northeast.
I mean, that is something that we could put in. I know there are other items that are allowed uses that you have to be so many feet from another type of use. I mean, that's something we could put in, and
I think that would be of interest, at least to the council. I don't know about.
Or maybe a system of one per block, or I'm just
Something.
making up numbers, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
Maybe a reflection back to you, Ms. Dingline. I'm thinking of the, specifically northeast Brainerd, we have Rice Lake. And so you may already have a natural magnet there that you might want to not necessarily discourage. But at the same time, recognizing that riparian lots on Rice Lake are different from lot and block of northeast Brainerd, and so we may have to think about, do you tease that one off of there, or just say northeast Brainerd is northeast Brainerd? But those lakeshore properties probably are a fairly attractive place to put short-term rentals.
They're also
And that may be, good for us to regulate that.
Yeah.
Just an expression of where the demand might be.
I mean, it's also a fairly attractive place to put an owner-occupied house.
Exactly.
But I see where you're going with that there's probably more demand there than there would be in
James?
on my block.
I guess I do have one other thought. I think, if it were ever revisited to, have more than 20, or if the commission deemed more than 20, I think that's where, something like that even may play a bigger part on spacing. Since we're only talking about 10 in the traditional neighborhood, I think there'd probably be enough spacing just kind of based on that. But, we could look at verbiage as well for that.
Very good. Other questions or opinions? This is our chance to kind of, please.
Mr. Chair, I just might reflect back at the three types. I like the three types. We heard one of those tonight. We heard an owner, for a period of time, a duration of time, having to live elsewhere. So the house is vacant and trying to be able to pay the taxes and everything else on that. What do? Well, it's attractive to use the short-term rental model. And so that is what is the AVDUL, right? The accessory vacation dwelling unit. Am I getting?
No, because he doesn't live there, that would be still considered then the vacation dwelling unit.
So because he's not living there during that period of time, he's a VDU, or
Yep, that's correct.
not an AVDL? Or
Yep.
Yeah, an Abdul. Okay.
I think the classifications are good, but I'm not sure about the acronyms, but that's, yeah.
Okay, well, then that's helpful. If it was treated like a limited, the 21-day rental limit on that would say there's, you get a 1 or 2 short term, but then that's otherwise pushing you towards, I think what we would like to see our rental housing do is serve longer term housing needs for our workforce community. So yeah, it struck me that that's one way where we would be moving or driving or incentivizing people to go to longer term rentals that own these rental properties. But so, no more comments.
And it's my hope that we would also, by limiting this, we can encourage more properties to go back on the market and be purchased by homeowners in town. And there's nothing like homeownership to build a sense of community, for individuals to build wealth, to families to build wealth. There's just, I don't see any substitute towards it. There's definitely a need for, in our comp plan, we've talked about different types of housing. I'm all in favor of that. But I just think there's just nothing like homeownership in terms of building responsibility and building community. So my thoughts on it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought we were still asking questions of staff. It's okay if we chat about it.
I think we're kind of gone into going back
Okay.
and forth here.
I too really liked the split between the 3 different tiers, and the unlimited on the first 2 makes a lot of sense, because to me, giving property owners that flexibility. I feel like on the third one, there's some stuff from the old code that we had about distance away that whatever management structure for it had to be. And I want to say that it was like within the city limits or within a certain number of feet. Like it was much closer than 50 miles away or whatever the rental license said. I could be remembering that wrong, and I'm not, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but it does seem to me like a lot of the benefits of doing this are magnified, and a lot of the negatives of doing this are diminished without needing a lot of staff time and police time and other people's time, or relying on the good graces of a management company. And if it's just self-regulated, and if you live nearby, it will be naturally more self-regulated. I would like to see some kind of provision for, someone that would be closer. And I don't have an exact, like, what that distance would be, but that was the thing that was missing on all these that we've reviewed since, this year to me. I like the cap. It almost has a liquor license kind of feel to it, which is maybe old schoolish, but, could we ever raise that to 30? Well, sure we could. If the need went, like, I could see us doing that. I think, though, we have to be a little bit careful about how we define ownership, because we say, you can only own one, and I actually like that provision as well. I think that's a healthy provision for the community. But, I own, businesses are people. This LLC owns it, this LLC owns it, that LLC owns it, and my LLC owns all those LLCs. And so I think we have to talk to the attorney, or we have to be very specific about what we mean by ownership and underlying ownership of this. I would almost like to join my 2 thoughts together and say, I would like to see the ownership be by someone who also owns and resides at a property within the city limits. That might not be where everybody else wants to go, but I would jump on board with that, and I would be much more liberal than 20 if we did something like that. I also think that the spacing issue is a real one. The idea of concentrating short-term rentals in one place, I think, should give us some pause. And I think even if we do the 20 limit, I would like the 10 limit, the 20 limit, these different limits. I think having a circumference around one as a place where, this kind of like we do with even adult uses, where within a certain limits of a school, you can't locate. Within certain limits of this, you can't put that. Within a certain limits of an existing interim use permit for a short-term rental, you can't have another short-term rental. That does you know, it creates kind of a Oklahoma Sooner kind of thing. Like if you cross the border first and stake your claim, you know, you can keep everybody else out. But really, it's only for this very specific category of them. And I don't see us having a gold rush for these as being the major concern, as much as there are some neighborhoods where I think we could get a concentration of these in a negative way. So those would be the three things that I would suggest or like to talk about is the definition of ownership, that we get that right. I'd like to have a discussion about where the actual management would be in proximity to the unit. And then do we have a spacing requirement in or not? And none of those are things that hills I would die on. Like, I'm happy to vote for this tonight if we were able to. But those would be things, if we're throwing out stuff to discuss, that I wouldn't mind chatting about.
Very good.
I'd be willing to help you and Tiffany plant the flag on that hill of limiting density, just how we get there.
The spacing?
Yeah, that.
Oh.
I think that's an important consideration, and, you know, one approach might be to just observe how these things start to dot the landscape. You know, we've got 14 more-ish that could hit the ground, and if they're on a short duration, we have probably the ability to move those pieces around. You know, it's just to see how it happens organically, and then the other options would be to try and state the structure that you want, and I don't know if we know what that is, what that's radius would be or not, but I think it's an important consideration and well brought up by.
I think, like, the hospital is a very good example. I think that as tenants, hospital workers are probably fantastic tenants. As neighbors, they're probably really good neighbors. I live next to two that are used by the hospital in this way. The hospital owns them and uses them. And for the most part, they are, you know, certainly not my hardest to deal with neighbor. But they, you know, you know, you'll have the Halloween lights on Easter. You'll have the lawn not mowed for weeks at times, depending on how people are cycling through there. You can definitely tell that it is not part of the neighborhood. Having one, okay, like we can all deal with that. Having two is, you know, if you had like 3 or 4 next to each other, now you're starting to get to a point where, like, all right, this block is moving in the wrong direction. That would be my concern.
And I think there is a natural tendency in real estate, when somebody gets one property, they look around for another
Oh,
property.
yeah.
That's real close, and go, well, that one's on the market, let's grab that one. Would a simplest safeguard be adjacent properties? That'd be like a super simple, real low bar if you went for something like that. But I'm open to discussion for something more nuanced in terms of looking at concentration.
I think adjacent properties would be, if that's an easy thing to get past, I think that would probably deal with 90% of the problems. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? Yeah.
I think it needs to be broader than that.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's one per block. You know, if you want to think about geography, maybe it's not adjoining, but maybe it's, you know, one per block is.
Per block, yeah.
For a platted block, and I don't know how you would define that for a contemporary neighborhood.
Well, how do we define it for, isn't it our accessory dwelling units that we have some, there's something that we.
So you
do.
could go simply into the plat, and they're platted as individual blocks. Lot 7, Block 6 of this plat. That'd be one way to do it. You know, the other things I was thinking about, you could do it by a radial, but it's fairly easy with GIS to do something like that. Also, you could define boundaries, that you're only, allowed, use the roads as boundaries. You're only allowed to have this many in North Brainerd. Maybe Northeast Brainerd is another boundary, and then, south of 210 maybe another boundary, something like that. So those I think are all, decent options there.
All right, other discussion? Other thoughts?
Do you have a preference of those options?
Ooh, there's a question.
Probably the easiest would be just to look at lot and blocks, and we can pull that up very easy from county records, and it's this plat, and it's part of this block, and so you can't have another one on that block.
So you could have them across the street from each other.
You'd be able to have them across the street from each
Right,
other
but-
potentially.
But not crossing behind.
Technically, you get four corners that could be together.
Technically, you could.
Worst case scenario.
Yeah, that would be very odd, but it would, yeah.
Just playing the hypotheticals.
I would be comfortable with that as a
Yeah.
solution to this, or as a way to try this out.
Are we making sense to you, James?
Yep.
Mr. Chair, could we,
Please.
is anyone interested in talking about this management issue, or am I the only one who cares about it?
This is the distance.
This is and the distance between whoever would be, in a sense, responsible for managing the property and the location. I understand 50 miles for a rental property. These are not rental properties in the sense that, someone has housing stock, is a voter in the city. People who live in short-term rentals will likely not be voters in the city. They're not, it's a different relationship. It seems to me like the old ordinance was really, like one of the things we said is that we want this to be a locally policed thing. And because we wanted it locally policed, we said, if you're going to do this, you're going to actually live in the city limits or have a management of the property be someone in city limits.
Could I ask clarifying, Chuck? So the goal would be, is it a response time thing? Is it a peer pressure to be on good behavior? What would you say is the principal reason to want to have someone in the city limits?
Well, I'm going to give you a principal and a subordinate reason.
Okay.
The principal reason would be that, yes, it would be a self-policing type of thing. I know the first one we looked at was a place with a swimming pool, and there was all kinds of concerns about parties and all that. And they had the person who actually was doing it lived 2 houses over. And they said, this is not going to be an issue because I live right here, and if they're causing trouble, I'm right there. So the idea is we don't want to do something that is going to cost us police time and resources and staff time and resources and all this stuff. How do we create systems that self-police? And one of the ways we do it is have the management be people who live nearby or, we're going to rub up against on a regular basis. I think the subordinate one was there is a desire to have, in a sense, I don't want to say local jobs, but local, if we're going to, let me put it this way. As a city that tends to be on the poorer spectrum of affluence, short-term rentals here have the opportunity to be a little more predatory from a financial standpoint. It would be very beneficial for us to have some kind of natural regulation on that. And if there are people that are going to do this, have it be very wide open for people who are local, who are ready to do it. Don talked about the building wealth aspect of it. I think that's very real. And have kind of a natural limiter on outside capital that would be coming in to, in a sense, displace homeowners from local homeowners from doing this. Those would be the two reasons.
I like your reasons. The trick is to define the mechanisms and how we do this. Because part of what you seem to be getting at is that you can get shell companies and different things like this in terms of who's actually the owner, and you don't want to have a situation like a straw owner or somebody that is there but isn't really in the game, doesn't have skin in the game.
Yeah, and that's hard to police too.
Yeah.
So I mean, let me give you an example. As a base case, if we just said, in order to do this, you have to reside in a property you own within the city. It limits the pool of the people who would be doing it,
Yeah.
but it would make all the other things very self-policing.
I would agree.
So
Go ahead, Mike.
So maybe just to follow up on that, so the application we considered today, would that individual be someone that lived in the city? So would not be eligible for the VDU?
That one, in my estimation, could be under number 2. I think it would be under number 2 in a sense, unlimited, like it wouldn't be regulated, it wouldn't be one of the 20 or one of the 10. But that person would need to actually live there at some point during the year, right? Like at some point, they would have to occupy that building.
James?
And number 2 does only limit to 21 days.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you've got that. Thank you for that clarification.
And would we want to make a distinction between owners and property managers of all? In terms of, or, you know, in other words, you can say, well, I live in Florida, but I employ a property manager in Brainerd. Or do you want to have the owner in Brainerd? I like the idea of having the owner in Brainerd. I
Well,
think that
I'm
is
saying for the third type, that's what I would say.
Okay,
For the second
okay.
type, you can have a manager wherever.
Okay.
right? And maybe we do up it, you know, if this is, let's take a scenario where someone does go south for the winter, and they've got 6 months where it sits empty. I think it's in everybody's interest to have someone in that home for 6 months. Maybe we up the number 2 from 21 days, is it 21 days cumulative for a year?
Yep, cumulative per calendar year. And then there's other, stay on the premise total of 2 to 7 consecutive nights. So really not more than 7, I guess, with that. And then may not operate more than 21 rental days per calendar year. So that could certainly be upped.
I mean, I personally would be open to raising that amount to accommodate people who were seasonal or people who had something that took them out of town so they wouldn't be limited to 21 days. Of course, a lot of those people would be doing a 6-month rental, which would be considered a rental property and not a short-term rental. So we do have ways to deal with that too, right?
Got tools for
Yeah, yeah.
This is good discussion. Other points anybody would like to raise? Questions? James, do you think you have something to get started with?
We do, you know, with some of the changes, I may recommend, maybe do we bring it back as another draft to discuss?
I would say yeah. I think you have a consensus.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. All right. If we're done with that, then we're moving on to our public forum. And this is the chance for people to discuss items not on tonight's agenda. And I'm going to open it at 7:37. Gonna look around. Anybody online? It is sort of limited to items not on the agenda, correct? Am I correct in understanding that? I think I'm correct in understanding that. So I would love to hear your input on another time because I'm sure you have some really good input for us. So I do appreciate that. All right. If we have nobody else, I will close the public hearing at 7:37. And then we are moving on to our staff reports.
Yeah, so just want to give a quick update on the EDA. Something the EDA has been working on this past year here is doing a logo, a slogan, and branding. It's always been really kind of lumped in with the City of Brainerd's website. So they're looking to get their own website, own logo, their own slogan. They reviewed a couple of initial kind of ideas at the last meeting. It's going to be tweaked a little bit. But hopefully that website should be rolled out sometime at the end of the year here, and kind of really the goal of that is to start marketing some of the properties that Brainerd has, you know, potentially for sale, some of our industrial lots, but also marketing some underutilized properties that I know we approached Westwood Mobile Home Park. We've approached some other potential owners of underutilized property that could also market on that website. So that's something we're looking to hopefully have done at the end of the year here as part of the EDA. And then I guess secondly, this next weekend here, we have a couple fun events happening downtown. We have the Flapjack Festival. That's going to be in the Laurel Street parking lot from 8 to noon, and then Touch a Truck from 10 to noon on Laurel Street. So a couple of fun things this weekend. Hopefully the rain holds out, and should be a good time for everyone.
Excellent. Very good. All right. We are to commission member reports. Mr. Duvall, anything?
Just briefly, just wanted to note that you may remember the group, My Neighbor to Love Coalition. They were looking at the homeless housing options with the tiny home development. They ended up doing a over-the-counter permit to develop sort of like a fourplex down there off of James between 3rd and 4th. And if I understand correctly, that now has the certificate of occupancy, and those units are now presumably housing people who are probably formerly sleeping in cars or couch surfing. And so it's an incremental move forward, something that we had input on, and hopefully they're moving now towards their phase two, which was the two fiveplex spider buildings, if you would, and the boarding house and health facility. That we, I think that one was done as a replatting there, so we had touched that. So hopefully they're moving on to that as well. So that's all I have.
Jeff? All right. Keep going around here. James?
I too am excited for the Touch a Truck and Flapjack event.
All right.
That's all.
Mr. Maroon?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Tiffany?
Nope.
I have just a couple things. Actually, a follow-up question for Mike. You expressed a little frustration with the new packet system, and I see in the notes there. I myself went on there and looked at this and said, what? And said a couple other words, trying to log into the whole thing was particularly arduous just to get an ID established and everything there. I'm probably missing something. What are the pluses? What are we gaining from this Civic Plus engagement, Dealey Bob?
So, guys, I haven't gone into the sign-in to go through the packet. Typically, when I go here, I go to Agendas and Minutes and just download a PDF packet. The real plus is the staff time that goes into creating it. It is a much simpler unit. Before, we were trying to coordinate everything in one folder, and then one staff member would have to go into it. Now we have checks and balances. So the staff time is considerably, it's much easier and a lot less time from a staff perspective to put packets together.
And so, as a member, if we're not going on to this new format, are we missing anything, or we just go to the city website and just keep downloading like we've always have?
Yep, I don't think there should be any issues with that.
You can't get your packet from the city website agenda anymore. They're going to take you to the Civic.
Well, you don't have to log in. You can find it. You can download the.
Someone emailed it to me.
It's also
which is-
emailed by Stephanie
Yeah.
too.
So that,
I couldn't get in either, but someone emailed it to me, and I thought, well, that's good enough.
Yeah, every time I change my my password to go, no, that's not good. No, we don't like that password. It's like, who's going to sneak in and look at the agenda? I'm not sure who we're trying to keep out on that.
Exactly. One of the advantages that I see to it is it has the ability for you to be able to keep notes specific to each of the agenda topics.
Okay.
So line item, unfinished business 7A, I can put some notes in there, so I don't have to print out a piece of paper and bring that with me so that I can read my notes and my markups and things like that. To me, that's pretty handy. It's just been a little bit challenging to be able to get the right link to get into the thing.
Yeah.
Then see everything pop up before you, here's your packet here, and so I think we'll get over those growing pains, and then you might find it a little bit more useful. Maybe if I had my tablet as opposed to my phone always times out while I'm doing these things, and you gotta go wake it up again to get to the place where you're at, but I think it's gonna be a more useful tool, and everything's broken down, but it's just like all new things launched, it's gonna be a little bit of hiccups, and I hope we get there.
And I know IT's continuing to work on some of those issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe too, James, it's, everything is much more uniform and it's more accessible.
Yep, exactly.
Because I know that we had some problems with that
Yep.
and accessibility issues.
Yep.
All right. Well, do we have a motion to adjourn? That was a good discussion there. I appreciate your bringing that up, Mike. Motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
All right. Do we have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.